Hi, Lynn Jocelyn here, functional medicine physician assistant. I'm excited to be giving you some quick clinical tips and teaching you a bit about your physiology so that you can live a more optimal health and do what lights you up every day. So let's talk first about glucose. Glucose, in the simplest definition, is a simple sugar, an important energy source in all living organisms, and is a component of many carbohydrates. Insulin is a hormone that's produced by our pancreas that regulates the amount of glucose in our blood. And insulin, as you'll learn in a few more slides, is really important, and it's an element that we need to take the glucose from the blood, bring it into the cells so that the body can actually use it for energy. So this is all the ways that glucose impacts the different areas of the body. It has an impact on your skin, your kidneys, adrenals, your intestinal system, your immune system, your brain, your heart, genitals, joints, and nerves. So it is really important to manage and to understand how your body processes glucose and how your own personal glucose insulin system is working. So let's take a look at what happens when somebody eats and what happens to glucose when we talk about a glucose spike and a glucose crash. So if you look over here on the x-axis, here is blood glucose level. On the y-axis is time after eating. So you have a meal here at the beginning of this, and you get a big glucose spike. This is eating a meal or a snack that has a high amount of digestible carbohydrate and leads to a glucose spike. And oftentimes when your glucose goes up that quickly, then it does what we call the glucose crash. So if you look here, time after eating, this is probably 60 to 90 minutes, and you actually get this crash where your glucose goes lower than your baseline. And this usually will trigger you to be more hungry, causes fatigue, can cause irritability, brain fog. And if you think about it, if it causes you to be more hungry, and you go grab that glucose-rich or carbohydrate-rich snack to bring you back up for that energy, this becomes a vicious cycle. And what we want to have happen is more of a minimal spike. So you eat here and you have a normal glucose release, and then you don't get the big crash. So I'm going to talk to you at the end of the talk today about how to do this with your food choices. So let's talk real quick about two terms that I'm sure you've heard: insulin sensitivity and insulin resistance. So you can think about insulin sensitivity as how well our body is able to use the insulin that the pancreas is producing. So I like this idea. You use glucose. Think of it, glucose as your cars. So the cars are driving around the blood vessels, driving around the highways, and you get a big glucose load. So think of that as the busy time on the highway, maybe rush hour. That's right after somebody's eaten. Have all this glucose in the bloodstream. But we want that glucose to get in the cell, because in the bloodstream, we can't use it for energy. We need it in the muscle cells. We need it in the brain cells. We need it in the gut cells to actually be used for fuel. So in order to get it in the cell, you can think of the cell as the garage. But in order to get it in, we have to have the garage door opener. And insulin is the garage door opener. So when somebody's insulin sensitive, this is a good thing. Rush hour happens, you get that food, that glucose rush, all those cars. You get to the garage, insulin is working just fine. It's sensitive with that cell. The garage door opens and glucose enters. All the cars go into the different garages, and the cell is able to use that for fuel. But what happens when somebody's insulin resistant? Same thing happens. You eat the food, rush hour comes, there's all this glucose, all these cars rolling around in the bloodstream, in the blood vessels. They get to the cell where they need to be, the brain, the muscle, wherever the body needs that fuel, but the garage door opener is not functioning. It's not sensitive to make that garage door open. And so insulin, the garage door opener, is not communicating with the cell. So the cars stay out here in the blood vessels. And if you go down here and you have an empty garage, our cells are empty of the fuel that they need. And so people are fatigued, they're irritable, and the sugar, the glucose builds up in the blood. And then to take it one step further real quick, so there's all this blood sugar in the blood. So the pancreas is like, oh my gosh, you need more insulin, you need more insulin. So insulin actually begins to increase as well. But if the cell is not sensitive, the garage door opener is not opening, we get both insulin elevation and glucose. And many of you know this, but the insulin is what we see rise a lot sooner, maybe 7 to 10 years earlier than somebody becomes diabetic based on their blood sugar rise. Insulin begins to creep up. So if we're working together, we have already checked your fasting insulin, most likely. Okay, so let's see, did I skip? Okay, so one quick thing I want to talk to you about before we get to the action items that you can take home today is this idea of stabilizing your blood sugar. If you stabilize your blood sugar, you also stabilize your insulin. And so when you think about the graph here, this is glucose on the x-axis and time on the y-axis. If you think about this person, they're going out of target. They're going real high, real low, real high, real low. This person, they're going not quite as high and they're keeping it a little lower. But this person, they're actually staying in that stable range. And so we know if you're in the stable range more when we use something called a continuous glucose monitor. That's something you wear on your arm. You can eat a meal, you can swipe it and see what your blood sugar is to determine in the moment, how did your personal body respond to that meal? Because we all are very different. When, some people will have a huge spike with a banana, other people not as big. So it is and a lot of that, this is another geeky cool moment, but a lot of that has to do with what microbes are in your microbiome, your gut lining. How are they processing that food that you're eating? And then that correlates to how high that sugar spike will be. Okay, but staying on track. We want you to be in this within range. And so how do you do that? So I'm going to give you a couple tips and hacks to go from these highs and lows to stay within range. So one thing you can do is do something called put some clothes on your carbs. I love this. This means if you're eating carbs, things like bread, corn, couscous, pasta, cookies, cereal, crackers, any of those things, fruit even, if you combine them with fiber, fat, and protein, you get a smaller glucose spike. And if you look here, this is the pair with nut butter. This is where with the green, time and target, we want to keep you in there. And you stay right in there, get a nice little spike, get enough for your energy, but it doesn't take you all the way up and then have you drop quickly. So you get that fatigue, irritability. And these next few slides come from Jessie at the Glucose Goddess. She's wonderful. If you are on Instagram, I highly recommend you follow her. She also has a new book coming out, which I will share at the end of this talk. Okay, so putting more clothes on your carbs. Oats with fruit puree, see the huge spike, and then drop. This time, oats, fruit puree, a tablespoon of butter, that adds the fat, plus an egg, adding the protein, and you get a reasonable spike, and then not a crash. Now, no matter what you eat, you will get some rise in your glucose. What we want to prevent is the super high spike, the real high, and then the lows. So another great way you can help mitigate these spikes and drops is adding vinegar. A couple different ways you can add vinegar. You can add vinegar to your salad dressing. You can add a tablespoon or two of vinegar to water and drink before your meal or during your meal. But look at these spikes. So olive oil on a salad, that's healthy and wonderful, and a rice bowl. The rice is a simple carb. So in the top graph, you are adding that fat. That's great. You're adding the fiber. That's great. So you still stay within target. So this isn't that bad. But look what happens when you add vinegar. Look at this. You have even more of a stable blood sugar. You don't go up quite as much. And acetic acid is in vinegar, so it doesn't even matter what kind of vinegar you use, although the one caveat is balsamic vinegar is higher in sugar content. So I would stick with things like white wine vinegar or apple cider vinegar. But the acetic acid in vinegar helps the muscle pull in the glucose faster and helps the mitochondria burn more fat. So this is just so simple and something you can do today. Okay, the last hack here is looking at juices versus whole fruit or whole vegetables. This is a cup of carrot juice. Carrot juice, super healthy, getting a lot of your nutrients, but you're not getting the fiber. And having the fiber mitigates that glucose spike. So here you go up and then you have a crash because it's, and I will say carrots in general are a vegetable with a higher sugar content. But here, if just boiled carrots, you still stay within target because you're getting the whole vegetable and the fiber. Okay, so Glucose Revolution, a new book out just in March by Jessie. And she's also the Glucose Goddess. So if you follow Instagram, I definitely recommend following her. This book is so user-friendly. It teaches you the nuts and bolts of what glucose is, what insulin is, why it matters for everyone, how to get your energy back. It has, I think she has 11 different hacks in there. So things you can begin doing today, like the 3 that I gave you today, to begin to help shift how your body is managing glucose and insulin, which in the long run will set you up for longer and more stronger quality of life. All right, thanks for being here today, and I look forward to our next conversation.